Hi everybody, it's Tim Schafer and we're here to talk about Psychonauts. Psychonauts 2? You say no. Psychonauts 1. Because this month is the anniversary, the 20th anniversary, if you can believe it, of shipping Psychonauts into the world, the very first game. Our very first game here at Double Fine Productions. And we're celebrating a lot of different ways and sharing a lot of things on doublefine.com. But today we're talking about inspirations that led to the creation of that game. These are mostly my inspirations. There was a big team involved and everyone had their own inspirations, but these are the ones that came to mind when I was thinking about how this crazy game came together. Going back in time, I was at LucasArts for a whole decade making point-and-click adventure games, and one of them I made was Full Throttle. And I've told the story a few times, but there was a scene I wanted to put in the game where Ben Throttle was going to take peyote and then have an interactive peyote trip that was going to be something the player would go through, and they would navigate these visions and mysterious symbols and use that information to solve a puzzle. But I kind of decided not to try and force that through because it seemed like at that time it would not have flown in that family company. No one censored it, but I don't think the world was ready for this idea quite yet. But I've loved the idea of dream sequences, even back then, and interactive dream sequences. This is really interesting. As dreams is a way of understanding your mind in a better way than you can when you just look at your conscious mind. And then I was pitching in the later times of my career at Lucas a spy game. I wanted to make the spy game that was influenced a lot by Hong Kong and martial arts movies I was seeing at the time. So there's a lot of martial arts fighting and also a heavy meditation part of it. And you were going to do things like intercept a killer drone that was trying to kill you and then meditate on it and use that meditation to go into a vision quest inside your own brain. And that vision quest would have puzzles in it and you'd use that information to identify like where the drone had come from. That was the idea I had for that game. I was pitching that around, talking to people about it. And someone came to my office and said, like, tell me about that game where you go into other people's minds. And I was like, no. You don't go into other people's minds, you go into your own mind. And then I was like, well, wait a second. And I just kind of thought about that, like, that could be better. But I kind of put that aside for a long time and kept working on my spy game. But I think that's really interesting to think about how a lot of times, like, creative ideas come from someone misunderstanding. Like, you read something, you read it wrong, and it sounds, wait, I like that idea better. You never know where creative ideas come from, and sometimes they come from a misunderstanding like that. Now I gotta talk about movies. Let's talk about Dennis Quaid. 1984, the classic film Dreamscape. If you've never seen it, you should watch it. It's a lot of fun, and it's about a guy who has the ability to go into people's dreams. So someone is sleeping there. It's a little creepy, but someone is sleeping there, he can like lay down next to them and go into their brain and experience their dream as they're having it. And you can see there's obviously a lot of overlap with the ideas of Psychonauts, of being able to explore someone else's unconscious mind, but this was specifically while they were asleep. And there's some weird things that happen in that movie that I'm not gonna defend, but there's a great scene where he goes in the mind of this boy who's having really bad nightmares, and he sees that the boy's being chased by this cobra monster, this hideous cobra monster trying to kill him. And Dennis Quaid is running around with him, trying to like help him, keep him safe from this cobra monster. And they run through his house, and at the dining room table, his dad is sitting there and not doing anything. And the little kid goes, "Oh, that's just my dad. He never helps." And they run through it.
That's my dad, but he won't help us.
Little bastard's right.
And I thought that was so kind of sad to see how the boy saw his dad in his own mind. And you can see like that play out in Psychonauts, Raz's relationship with his father. Like, I think got a lot of inspiration from that. So basically I just stole that whole thing. Sorry, Dennis Quaid. But it's a fun movie. Kate Capshaw is in there, and it's worth checking out. There's a book I wanted to mention, Haruki Murakami book called Hard-Boiled Wonderland at the End of the World, which is a book about, among other things, a man finds out that he is slipping into his own unconscious mind, and he's going to eventually become trapped inside his unconscious, and he won't be able to experience the outside world anymore. He's going to be trapped in this other part of it. And half the book is set inside this little village that is really just a construct inside his mind. And there's all the symbolism of these shadows and a library and the people he meets there, but it really just stands for this kind of prison inside his own mind. And that was just that idea of constructs inside your head and different places you can go and different locations you can go to that are in your unconscious. They're not the real world, but they're inside your head. I thought was really interesting, and I think that kind of persisted in my head ever since I read that book in the 90s. 1994, New Legend of Shaolin. I was watching a lot of Hong Kong movies in the 90s, and this one is a Jet Li classic. And it's one of the two movies he made with a child actor who could match a lot of his moves, and they did a lot of martial arts together, like Jet Li and this kid. The other one he made was My Father the Hero, which is a great like cop movie. But this is an old Shaolin style movie, and it's got this little kid in it who is just amazing. He's got kind of like a little mohawk, and he's just very intense, no nonsense little kid. He's not like doing a lot of precocious little things. He's like a kung fu master, and he's like really serious, and he's still a kid, but he's just so intense. You might not think of Raz when you watch that, but to me, it was like I'd never made a game about a kid before. Like, Day of the Tentacle or Full Throttle or Grim Fandango, they're all adults. And this was the movie I was like, oh, it would be fun to do a game about a 10-year-old, but who's like, or got a really adult mind because they're really dedicated to, they're focused and they're committed. And that's what I think Raz is like when he shows up at camp and he's like, I want to be a Psychonaut. So one, he's just driven to that task. And I think that was very much inspired by the kid from New Legends of Shaolin. It's also a really fun martial arts movie. I have Fly 2 on my list because we're thinking about like, what is the setting for this? And someone threw out, what about the Fly 2? And I said, there was a Fly 2? I didn't know there was a Fly 2. And it's Eric Stoltz as the child of Brundle, like the Fly character. And he's being raised in a scientific research facility. So it was a facility where they had all these like kids with psychic powers kind of trapped and they're experimenting on them. I think this has done many times since, and like Stranger Things has a setup like this too, Firestarter. But this facility had a bunch of kids together, and it was going to be really scientific. The main character was going to be named X2, I remember that. And you're later going to meet his friends X3 and X4, but then you meet X1, and maybe later on meet X0. It'd be like Racer X.
I'm giving up being a racer, and from now on I'll be a full-time international secret agent without a name or country. Goodbye, Speed.
I don't know. I had always ideas for it, but the slogan was going to be X2. Raised by science, loved by no one. Way more dramatic than, anyway, that was one of those little dead ends that we didn't go down, but it did kind of evolve, like, I don't think that research facility would be as fun to explore. And then in doing free writing after that, like, what if it was in a summer camp? So it became a summer camp, which is like a little lighter of a setting, but still a gathering of a bunch of kids together for purposes of like science and stuff and training. Now, I bring up like Nightmare Before Christmas, 1993. People always refer to Psychonauts that they did at the time as Burton-esque. And I think like anything that's creative or interesting looking always gets called Burton-esque, and it's kind of a sad commentary on how few things they were back then that were interesting and creative. Because like, I don't know if you would say, like you look at Psychonauts, you wouldn't say it's exactly like Nightmare Before Christmas, but it definitely was on our minds a lot. Like that movie had a lot of impact to people who watched it back then. It was so creative and such a well-crafted movie, and if we had our way, we would have probably made the game look a lot more stop motion. Like we kind of like, what if it looked like stop motion? I was really fascinated with like claymation. Like, what if we had a shader where like you have moving thumbprints, kind of like a Will Vinton claymation at the time. Like you'd see the thumbprints of the animator moving around every frame. I was like, what if we could do that? I didn't even know what a shader was back then, but I had this idea, and basically, like, we just didn't know how to do that. Like, so I don't know if that would have been better or worse, but Psychonauts might have had that real Nightmare Before Christmas puppet kind of look. But I think you can look at Black Veiltopia and see a lot of inspiration for that in the Oogie Boogie scene at the end of Nightmare, where just the coolness, it's something I've always liked, is the way the black light looks and how it moves, how it's dark, but it's bright at the same time. So Black Veiltopia, I think, owes a lot to Oogie Boogie. We're gonna do our best. We're gonna do the best we can. Edit that so I got that quote right.
I'm gonna do the best I can.
We're gonna do the best we can. Forget it. Forget I said any of that. Okay, another artist I just wanted to call out that I know a lot of artists talked about a lot. Our artists Scott Campbell and Peter Chan and Nathan Stapley at the beginning of that project were trying to figure out the look. And a lot of the game is really like Scott Campbell's characters come to life. But one of the inspiring artists we're looking at was named Joe Soren. Joe Soren's an American artist who does a lot of really unique character shapes and also character color schemes. If you look at the faces of the characters in Psychonauts, they're all faces you don't see in nature and like colors you don't see in nature necessarily, blue faces and green faces. And it's one of the reasons that a lot of the characters' faces in Psychonauts have a very odd, like painterly, multicolored look to them. It was very inspired by Joe Soren, but I thought it looked neat in a creepy way, but I like it. I'm naming a bunch of video games here because I was at LucasArts making point-and-click adventures, which are like, mostly they were 2D, Grim was 3D, but you would mostly click on an object and then click to interact with it, and the character's motion would be handled by the game. And then I played Super Mario 64. I remember that was the first one where I just like pushed the joystick in the direction I wanted to go, and the character ran that way, and I was like, wait a second. As much as I love tank controls. And then at the time, I played a lot of games like Final Fantasy VII, maybe a little later like Ocarina of Time. These games where you just drove the character directly and ran around and could still do things and have a story and solve puzzles and stuff. But I think that was the moment where I was like, I don't think I want to make a point-and-click adventure anymore. I think I want to make a console game. I want to make a character-driven console game that is just really immediate and has more action, but has a lot of narrative and stuff. And I think that was a big turning point for me to leave behind what I've been doing for the last 10 years and try something new. So I would credit those games. And another one, Skies of Arcadia, was when I played the most recently before making Psychonauts. And there's some actual mechanics from that game that showed up in Psychonauts, like the chams. They're these little buried chams that kind of give off this vibration and sense that they're under the ground. You have to dig them up, and I think that's where, obviously, where Titanium came from, Psychonauts 2. So thank you, Skies of Arcadia. Shout out Harper. And then I want to talk about Figments. So Figments are a collectible in Psychonauts. They're these little 2D drawings that you can run through and collect, and they help tell the story of the game. And I think it's interesting because there's different stories about where those came from. I was talking to people on the team, and I remember this version that Peter Chan and Scott Campbell remember, where we were looking at artists like Jean-Michel Basquiat and Paul Klee, who both, among their other styles, they also have this really squiggly line art drawing. And Peter's thought was that, how do we differentiate the mental world from the physical world in Psychonauts? You're in the campgrounds, that's physical. Go in someone's mind, that's mental. How do we make them look different? And one of the ways was, well, how about the world is kind of, it's a thought, it's a memory, it's unconscious, so it's maybe half finished. So we could have a solid tabletop, but we could have a bottle that's a 3D model bottle, but then we could have a line drawing of a bottle and a line drawing of something else, and that would make the world look a little bit like a dream. And that was something he was experimenting with at the time. Now, Eric Robson, our lead designer, is like, let me tell you where Figments came from. We were doing the Nightmare level, and I wanted to make it more scary. And there was this game called The Suffering, which used to like flash up these images on the screen. They were really scary visions just for a few seconds. And so I put up a child's drawing of a bunny in the Nightmare level and just flashed it on the screen. And that Scott liked the aesthetic so much, he's like, we could put this everywhere. Everybody's like 100% sure that their version of the story is right. And I think it's really interesting because games are bringing together a lot of creative people, and like creative people collaborating on something is really interesting. But there's this thing where ideas come from is not always like one place. And you might be 100% sure that it came from this one place, but to someone else, their start of that journey to that idea, where you met and had an idea together, could have started somewhere else. And so they think it came from here, and you think it came from here. And really it was when you both described your ideas, the overlap, it became the idea that got into the work and eventually comes to make something like a game like Psychonauts that we're here still talking about 20 years later. So I hope that was interesting. If not, it's just me rambling, but I'm excited to be talking about Psychonauts 20 years later. I still love that game. I hope you like it too. And I thank you for joining us on the celebration of the 20th anniversary of Psychonauts. You guys gonna say anything? We'll dub that in later. Bye.